live! Hello everyone and welcome to Samantha Politics, a show where we talk about global politics and women's rights. We have a great show coming up.
On the military for the genocide against the Rohingya. So
as these poor people are being attacked, people are hiding in their offices. You guys saw a guest.
We're going to be talking about Burma and Russia today, but just a quick U.S. Native American Secretary of the Interior. Now, this is really monumental because
I'm Samantha Carlin, your host of Samantha Politics, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
And we are live. Welcome to Samantha Politics. Sorry for the brief hiatus. I'm super happy to be back with everyone. We have a great show coming up with two amazing experts on Tunisia, one of whom is sitting in Tunisia right now. So that is going to be the main content of our show. But first, let's go forward with some global news updates. Pakistan. So several weeks ago, the 27-year-old daughter of a former Pakistani diplomat was tortured, stabbed, and beheaded, according to police reports. Now, an acquaintance was arrested, but her death sparked an outcry about the level of violence against women in Pakistan and just how bad it is and how little justice is served for women who are survivors of sexual violence or who are murdered in sexual violent crimes like this one. By one count, 34% of women experience spousal violence, and that is obviously extremely low. In general, violence against women is very, very, very underreported because of the backlash it incurs and because of the private nature of the events themselves. The country's Prime Minister, Imran Khan, faced some backlash after he said that victims of rape wear too few clothes. This is problematic because it's putting the blame game again on the women. It's your fault that you were raped versus it is the perpetrator's fault for raping you because he is a criminal and a sicko and he needs to go to jail. It is not a woman's fault for wearing too little clothes. And I loved, if y'all remember the Chilean episode that we did about that song, The Rapist Is You or The Rapist S2, where the women say, hey, guess what? It's not us. It's the state. It's the police. It's the government. It's men. It's not us. Like, we are not responsible for you raping us. And I think that that's incredibly important. So, unfortunately, a lot of religious leaders in this country have been very reticent to push for women's rights. Hopefully, we'll get Shad Begum on the show, who's a women's rights activist, to come talk to us about what the situation is in Pakistan. News coming out of the U.S. We have our first female governor of New York State, Kathy Hochul. Unfortunately, it's not under the best of circumstances. She is only becoming governor because Andrew Cuomo has resigned after an investigation reported that he sexually harassed at least 11 women. I think what strikes me about this case, as well as Weinstein, as well as Epstein, is the number of women who seem to have to come forward or be pulled out of the wings, as was in this case, to basically prove that somebody is a sexual harasser or a rapist. It can't just be one woman. No one can believe one woman. But if there's 11 women, then we believe them. It just strikes me as just extremely frustrating that it takes so many women. And, they kind of kept finding in this investigation about Cuomo that all of these women were credible. It takes so many women, though, to finally oust someone. And even then, Cuomo wasn't going to resign. In a moment of hilarity, or not so hilarity, I was sent a job posting for Cuomo's government, Cuomo's administration, that was just posted last week. So clearly this man did not think that he was going to resign resign. And he basically pushed against even pressure from Biden, our president, to even resign. Finally, he did, in fact, resign amidst all of this pressure, but it really was unwillingly and not with any sort of uh, feeling shame or apologies or anything like that. He did so in a kind of petulant state that this wasn't what he deserved, but he was going to do it. And I think it would have been a lot more effective if he just said, "I apologize." Even if he thinks he didn't do anything, I apologize that my behavior, insulted you, or that, I was inappropriate, and I won't do it again. I mean, that's the better way to handle this situation versus acting like an angry child and going, "Well, it's not my fault. I don't want to step down." And then finally stepping down. So, our first female governor of New York, she's not the first woman who has replaced a man. You'll remember when Dominique Strauss-Kahn was caught for potentially raping a maid at the hotel. He was also replaced by a woman. So, big news coming out of New York. Cuomo has been in power for a very long time there. And I personally am really excited to see what Kathy is going to do and how she's going to affect the state differently and maybe more of a priority on women's issues. So, we'll see. We also obviously had the Olympics happen. One major thing that happened in the Olympics was the case of Simone Biles. Now, Simone Biles was I just learned this term, I didn't even know it existed, the GOAT, greatest of all time. That's what the kids are saying these days, I guess. The GOAT of the Olympic team, having won numerous gold medals, and she dropped out midway through the Olympics. It turns out that her aunt had died suddenly in the midst of the Olympics, but she made way for another gymnast from the USA team who did end up taking gold. I think what's important to know about Simone Biles stepping down is that mental health is important and that we have to respect people's mental health. And it's got to be really, really stressful to be an Olympian with so much pressure on you, and then add to that the abuse that she suffered at the hands of Larry Nasser, another guy who had to have 16, I don't even know how many women come out against him for their allegations to actually be taken seriously that he was sexually abusing them. So that history, and then of course coupled with the death of a family member, it has to be so much for this young woman to take, and the media, being constantly under the media spotlight. So I really applaud her decision to step down, and she made way and made space for somebody else to earn the gold, which I also thought was really great. But I think it's a good message to pay attention to your mental health, and mental health does matter. The US also finished the games with 66 medals in women's events, the most ever for any nation. And women's medals actually made up 58.4% of Team USA's total of 113 overall, which topped the medal count at the Olympics. We won 23 gold medals, the US women, to fuel the US gold total of 39. So more than half of our Olympic gold medals were won by women. So the basketball team claimed its seventh consecutive gold. The water team won its third gold, and the volley team won its first. And Sunisa Lee was the one who did replace Simone Biles in winning the gold medal in gymnastics. What else is happening in the world? Horrible, horrible images. Zach, you can put up these images of fires going along the Mediterranean. They started in Turkey, in the Kash and Antalya region, which, if anyone's been there, is a breathtakingly beautiful region on the coast of Turkey. It's horrifying to see the images come out of there. They're now blazing across Greece, where there's residents are pitching in with water hoses and buckets to try to stem the blazes because there's just not enough firefighters there and enough water to stem the blazes. 8 people have died in Turkey. There's also been fires in Italy and in Southern Europe. Why is this happening? Climate change. Remember those people who said climate change didn't exist? Well, they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, I don't know if the evidence could really get any clearer than these wildfires. I mean, they first totally destabilized California. Now they're blazing all over Europe. And these super, super hot, dry winds and these record high temperatures due to climate change are causing the fires to be even worse and to even ignite in the first place. So I think this is a clear call to everyone that we have to understand that climate change is real, and climate change is causing serious havoc. It's causing death. It's causing destruction of people's homes. And we need to take it seriously and as a major priority, whether it's the United States or any other country, because we can see how it doesn't just affect California, but it's happening in Europe and it's going to happen in the Middle East. It's going to happen everywhere. And so we really need to take this seriously. Moving to Afghanistan, Zach, you can put up that slideshow. So we did an episode in Afghanistan on Samantha Politics right when the US announced the removal of troops and the deadline that we would remove troops by September 11th, which is fast coming up. And we had conflicting viewpoints. Some of our guests said, the Afghan army is fierce. They're going to be able to stem the Taliban for at least a little while. And then we had another viewpoint from the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Annie Sfortzheimer, who said, joke's on you, Taliban's going to take over and women and girls are going to get the brunt of not just women and girls, but Afghan interpreters for the U.S. troops, and women and girls their rights are going to go downhill extremely fast. Unfortunately, Ms. Fortheimer was correct, and the Taliban has made so many advances in the country in such a short period of time that it's shocking. The Biden administration is apparently on video calls and calls constantly to figure out how exactly did this go south so fast, and what can the U.S. still do. Now, it's gotten so bad that the US is actually withdrawing all of our embassy workers, or excuse me, almost all of our embassy workers. I mean, this is a huge embassy in Kabul. It is ginormous. That is a big thing to do, to remove our embassy workers. And they're calling on every US citizen to get out of the country as quickly as possible on the first flight available. They're also expediting transfers and flights for Afghan interpreters for the US military and the US government that had helped us out during the troop surge, because guess what? The Taliban is murdering people who either collaborated with the Afghan government and who collaborated with the US government. So their lives are very much at risk. The one thing that the U.S. is continuing to do, although we have pulled out most of our ground troops, are to help with drone strikes in support of the Afghan army against the Taliban. But things are not looking good. There are reports that Kabul is likely to fall in as little as 30 days. I want you to let that land. Kabul, where the government is set up, where the U.S. embassy has been for 10 years? No, more than 10 years, 15 years, is going to fall to the Taliban in 30 days, most likely. That is unbelievably startling. We've already seen degradations in women's rights. Women now are going back to Sharia law, where they have to have a male chaperone in order to leave the house. Girls' schools are being closed. Uh, and it's just, the appropriate Islamic role of women is starting to take over by Sharia law. They now must wear the burqa, and they're burning public schools, libraries, and computer labs. It's not looking good in Afghanistan, and it's just a shame, because I think we could have done this a lot better, and in a way that um, we gave some incentives to the Taliban, and we said, okay, if you do this or if you agree to this, we'll remove our troops, versus just saying, okay, doesn't matter what you do, you could kill everybody in the next town over, we're still getting our troops out by September 11th. I think that was a really big error in judgment, and I learned that from Ms. Fortzheimer, so I want to thank you, Annie, for kind of giving me that insight that without giving any incentives, the Taliban just is basically running rampant through the country. The hard part is, do we as Americans still want to be in Afghanistan? No. That's the hard part, right? Is that America's sick of the war in Afghanistan, but it's just really unfortunate after so many years of putting so much money, so many personnel, so much so much grit and hope and lives, the amount of people who have lost lives there, American troops, into this, that all of a sudden it's just falling to the Taliban like that. Unbelievable. So we will keep you posted on what's going on with Afghanistan. So moving on to the main topic of our show, Tunisia. So I want to ask you a question. Which country was the first country to break out in the Arab Spring protests? Tunisia. Tunisia was the first country to trigger the Arab Spring, breaking out into protests and actually causing a democratic transition and ousting the dictator at the time. This didn't happen in a lot of other countries, like Syria, which broke out in protest against Assad. Guy is still somehow in power, I think probably because he's killed all his people and there's no one left to protest against him. But there was no transition in Syria, for example. But Tunisia did have a democratic transition and democratic elections. Now there's thousands of people protesting after the president, Kais Saied, suspended parliament and fired the country's prime minister. Now, but people are actually protesting on behalf of the president and against the parliament, which I think is really interesting. So we'll have to kind of have our guests help unwrap this a little bit more. And Al Jazeera was, which kind of sides with Parliament, has been, people basically have been ordered to leave the Al Jazeera station. So the question is, have democratic transitions really been achieved? Tunisia is suffering the highest death rate in Africa from COVID. And so part of this, as usual, as we see on most of our shows, is botched handling of the COVID crisis. High unemployment rates. There were reports from the New York Times of, people hunting through the trash to get food, people not being able to eat meat because they don't have the money to eat meat. It's not going great in Tunisia, despite the fact that there was a democratic transition 10 years ago. So I am very excited to bring in two unbelievable guests onto our show to discuss what is happening in Tunisia. Maro Youssef holds a PhD in political sociology for the University of Texas at Austin. Her research focuses on gender, politics, and social movements in North Africa. In her dissertation, she looked at how Islamist and secularist women activists remained politically active throughout the democratic transition in Tunisia between 2011 and 2018. Before entering academia, Dr. Youssef was a U.S. diplomat and was a political analyst in Tunisia, Turkey, and Washington, D.C. for 6 years. Hi, Maro. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you. I was joking with Maro. We have to give a credit to our amazing intern Alicia for finding Maro. She's like, "How did you find me? This is such a perfect fit. This show is so perfect for me." I was like, "I know, you're so perfect for the show. I'm so happy to have you."
I'm glad we swiped right.
I know. I'm glad we swiped right also. And thank you, Alicia, for finding Maro for us. You're amazing. I'd like to bring in our next guest as well. Mrs. Monia Amar is a Tunisian judge. She's currently a magistrate counselor at the Cassation Court and is a human rights, international humanitarian law, and ICL teacher at the Higher Institute of the Judiciary. She's also the head of the Arab Center for International Law based in Tunisia. Ms. Amar was nominated as a member of the editorial board of the International Review of the ICRC. And she was appointed as the Regional International Humanitarian Law Coordinator of the MENA region at the ICRC Regional Office in Egypt. She was also elected as the head of the Arab Women IHL Committee in the Arab Women's Organization and as the chair of the Human Rights Arab Independent Experts Commission in the League of Arab States. She's written many articles and is a co-writer of books on human rights and women's rights and is an activist in Tunisia. Welcome to the show, Monia.
I'm delighted to be with you in this show.
I'm delighted to have you. So let's just start with, why do you think these protests happened now? What triggered these protests to happen right now?
This is for me, this question? Or
either of you. Jump in.
Let's have our expert Tunisian start.
Okay. I think that we in Tunisia the situation was worse than in 2011, considering the economically situation. People feel more poor, more marginalized. We have, as you said, the crisis, COVID crisis. The government failed to face this crisis, and so we also noticed that the politicians, especially in the parliament, are not aware and are not doing what should be done to stop these crises. And they are fighting together about their interests, political interests, about ideology and about power, but not trying to find solutions to our crisis. Because of that, I think people were just depressed, feel depressed because nothing was working in Tunisia. Economically, politically, there are many cases of corruption with responsible in judiciary, in parliaments, everywhere, and nothing was done to stop this, and to hear this, what people want really, and no response for the needs, for as I said, for to find solutions. Nothing was done to find solutions.
Yeah, Mara, what are your thoughts?
I agree 100% with Madam Ammar. I think also it's important to take a step back and think about democratic transitions and how it's not a linear process. And so we had, I believe the democratic transition is still going on today. Tunisia did not achieve democracy, and it takes a very long time, as we see in the US, to achieve democracy. And even with us here, we have a lot of problems and infighting between Congress, which is
what? I haven't seen any infighting in Congress. I don't know what you're talking about.
It's perfect here. And I would say, as a political sociologist, we need to keep watching Tunisia, but this is very normal. It's normal to have these hiccups and to have infighting. And we don't have a dictatorship in Tunisia. We have different groups trying to build consensus and to agree on things. And that's where we see the struggle. It's different branches of government, just like the US, and they can't all agree. So like Madame Ammar, I think Tunisians are really tired of what's happening because they're not seeing progress fast enough.
I think that's really interesting and important to think that about, that democracy doesn't happen overnight. It's not like, okay, you have a you have a democratic president. Now it's a democracy, everyone, because there's all these other things that make up a democracy, like a very strong civil society. It's not just about, did you vote for the president? So I think that's a really great way and a frame to think about it, Mauro. So I would love to hear, both of you have really thought a lot about women and have done a lot of research on women. And you are a women's activist, Monia. Mauro, can you explain a little bit about your dissertation work on women since the Arab Spring and how they have fueled the protest movement? And then I'd love to hear Monia's experience as well.
Sure. So I started working on Tunisia as a diplomat in 2012. And that was after the revolution happened. But what I noticed very quickly is that women were at the forefront of the revolution, of the democratic transition, of solving the political crises that happened in 2013, for example, with the assassinations of political leaders and people calling for the government to step down. In 2013 and 2014, even, with women trying to finish writing the new constitution and passing the new constitution. So my research personally for my dissertation was looking at how do women sustain their political participation during democratic transitions. And I looked at 2 women's rights organizations and their different strategies and tactics and how they stayed alive, basically, and survived. One of the reasons was they formed coalitions across ideological differences. Islamists and secularists very briefly worked together. They also professionalized, they built up their capacity, and they worked to establish offices. Before the revolution, there were only 2 women's rights organizations, independent women's rights organizations, ATFD and FTUR. After, we saw at least 300.
Wow, that's amazing. So that is an evidence of kind of democratic transition of going from 2 to 300.
Right. So we saw women join civil society. We saw women join politics in historical numbers. So women are still active and they're still trying to find today a solution to the political crisis. And they're joining other civil society groups like ATFD is joining, and UNFTA. They're joining other organizations to come up with a roadmap on how to move forward. So they still have a seat at the table.
Miss Amar, yeah, would you like to comment on that?
I just want to add that the women struggle began even before the independence. We have a movement called the Women Movement in Tunisia since 1938. And we are celebrating the day when women protests against the colonialism. And I think, yes, in Tunisia we can say that the political will is the main factor that install women's rights, etc. But in reality, women started struggling for this, struggling for independence since a while. So, and it continues. I think we have to go back somehow, a little bit to the history and say that Bourguiba, the first president of Tunisia, made a lot for women, not in the perspective of women's rights, but in the perspective to build the new state, the Tunisian new state, because he wanted to involve every citizen, every people in Tunisia to build this new people, this new state, and for that he needs to ensure freedom for women, to educate women, to not oblige women to be married at a minimum age. And because of that, the first law was adopted after the independence was the Code of Personal Status, before even the Constitution. And we know that till now, this family code remain the most progressive law in the Arab region and Muslim countries, because it abolished polygamy, which no Arabic country succeed to do it till now. It's also installed the judiciary, the divorce, fixed the minimum age to be married, equality in divorce for both men and women. And the second law,
Monia, I'm going to stop you there because I want to just hear from Maro as well. But I also just want to clarify for the audience, because I had never heard of this law. It's called the Code of Personal Status, and it was brought about, I think it was like 1957 or something like that. Is that correct?
1956.
56.
1956.
And it's the family law of Tunisia. So they have it in every Muslim country, but it is progressive.
And because of we are celebrating every day, every year, the day of the adoption of this code, and it's on 13 August. Tomorrow we are celebrating the National Women Day in Tunisia, and it corresponds to the adoption of this code. And I think it's very symbolic. Very important to know that that this code is very important to ensure the freedom of women, because without this we can't see women in higher education, we can't see women working as they want, we can't see women be involved in civil society, in politics.
So this code is really important to women. Mara, what are your thoughts, or is there anything that you want to add on this code?
Yeah, so the only thing that's still a problem with the code is the lack of inheritance equality for women. And so in 2018, Tunisian women held the first rally in the Arab world to demand equal inheritance rights. This is the last remaining issue that's a problem where women don't have equality. So it shows you two things. One, it shows you that there's still work to be done. But two, it shows you that they have so many rights that they're now just focused on inheritance. Not all Tunisians support inheritance reform, but it shows you that they've taken care of all the basics like polygamy, like a minimum age for marriage, like women's right to initiate divorce, that now they're trying to complete, total women's equality by advocating for inheritance reform, because that affects so many aspects of women's lives, like their economic independence and freedom and their ability to leave a bad marriage or leave their families. There's so many reasons why equality and inheritance is important.
Something. What we saw during the last 10 years showed us that it's not the problem of equality of women's rights. It's not just a matter of laws. It's a matter of conscience, of education, of sensibilization, and because of that, we are now struggling to disseminate human rights at all levels of education and I mean, we have to disseminate education to sensibilize people about the human being, about the equality, the principles of human rights. Because without that, we will remain struggling for changing the adults and behavior, and it's not easy to change the mentality. We have to educate children on these principles of human rights, on equality, on the universality of human rights, on non-discrimination. When people grow up and among such education based on discrimination between women and men, the respect of law become very, very weak. And this is what we notice during all this last 10 years, because when politicians and especially Islamic politicians came with their ideology, and try to change the model of society in Tunisia, and showed us that they have many, they are against equality inheritance. We show the discussions that was taken in the parliament about the gender equality.
Monia, I'm just going to stop you there because I want to go to Maro for a second. Maro, you wrote a piece for Open Democracy about how women's rights have improved in North Africa, but the struggle still continues. Can you give us a lens on, you looked at all of these different countries, about how Tunisia is doing with regards to women's rights and what's still happening that's, you said in your article that some things are backsliding. Where is the backsliding and where do you feel like the country needs to go?
Well, one thing is inheritance reform and how that hasn't happened yet. But another thing is there's increased reporting in violence against women since the revolution. And that's something that's very alarming for Tunisians. So I don't know if violence has gone up or if reporting has gone up.
Right, reporting.
Like Madame Monia was saying, we have laws in Tunisia that are very, very progressive. In 2017, I believe, they passed one of the most progressive gender-based violence laws in the world. They recognize marital rape as a form of violence. They recognize political violence against women as a form of violence. This is only recognized in maybe 10 or 11 countries in the world, not including the US, I believe. So we're seeing increased violence against women. I wrote another piece with Sarah Yerkes on how this is exacerbated by COVID and women staying home and an increase in intimate partner violence. We're also seeing it against women politicians, so that's political violence. More women are being pushed out of politics or being pushed not to run for office. And these are some of the backsliding issues that I and my co-authors talked about in Tunisia.
Monia, have you seen, violence against women politicians or even against yourself as a judge? Have you seen, kind of women who want to run for office under threat?
I agree about the increase of violence, but we are till now asking ourselves, it is because the cases of violence or the cases of reporting violence. Until now, we haven't enough studies about that. And today, in 12th August, we organized with the Ministry of Women a conference about combating violence and about effectiveness solution to stop violence against women. And I think we are all agree about that we have to come back to the real reasons of the violence, and still it's the discrimination, it's the education, it's laws, it's also a kind of interpretation of the Islamic laws, and for that we need to sensibilize every stakeholders, every person, every responsible concerned by the violence. And as Maro said, we had a lot of work to do, but we have to prioritize our work, and we have to adopt a strategy for that, and not just focusing on the law. We have a very good law, but in reality, we face many problems. Concerning your question about if I was myself object of violence, hopefully no, but we saw in the parliament how men parliaments
Male
women.
parliamentarians.
Yes, exactly.
And I heard there were fist fights on the floor of Parliament. Is that correct?
Yes, and there were two men that assaulted a woman parliamentarian, MP Abir Musi.
Exactly.
Say what you want about her politics, but it's not okay, right? And I'm not.
Wait, so they hit her? Like, what did they do? Like, on the floor of Parliament?
Yes.
Yes. And the most grave thing that the head of Parliament didn't do nothing for that.
Wow.
And we have before cases of violence in the Parliament, not in the assembly, but outside, and he didn't nothing for that to stop that. And as you said before about Pakistani women and the rape, we always try to find that women are responsible. Women are speaking loudly. They are protesting loudly. They shouldn't before men.
Yeah.
And so because of that, women felt disappointed. It's not democracy.
Right,
This is
Mara.
not the democracy
Do you want to pop in on that, Maro? Thank you, Monia.
And I want to go back and put things into perspective still. Tunisia still has the most progressive rights for women in the whole Arab world. And, you know, violence reporting is going up. But if we think about something like sexual harassment and street calling, Tunisia is still one of the safest and best places, at least in the capital, where I have been. I spent 2 years in Tunisia doing field work or serving as a diplomat, and not once did I feel like my life was in danger as a woman. I've spent time in a lot of other Middle Eastern countries, and I can't say the same. I felt scared. I have been violated, but not in Tunisia. So in the grand scheme of things, Tunisia is where it is because of Tunisian women like Madame Monia and others, and they will not take crap, if I may say.
Monia, you're a judge. Can you tell our audience what kind of cases do you judge?
Now I'm working in a criminal chamber in the cassation court, but I have to mention that women can work in every judiciary chamber, civil, commercial, criminal, penal. There is no limitation in this field. We are equal, men and women. We can be inspector, judge, investigator, judge. We can work everywhere, and as I said, there is no limitation. And I have to mention also that we are a little bit afraid that judiciary will be feminist, because the high number of women in the institute, each year we are noticing that the number of female are more than the number of boys and of men. And it's a problem somehow, because what we wish, it's the equal representation.
So you're saying you're worried there's going to be too many women? You're worried there's going to be too many women? That's so funny.
Yes. But it's not healthy for in society to see judiciary, the majority of judiciary, the judges are
women. How interesting.
Yeah. We want to reflect the composition of the society as it is, equal, parity, etc., but not not female judiciary or female.
Right. Aro, I want to move to something else because I thought it was really interesting. When I was doing my pre-interview with you, I said, "What should I ask you? What should I not ask you?" You said, "Please don't ask me if it was a coup." Can you explain why this kind of characterization of like whether it's a coup or not a coup is kind of not the right frame to put on the situation in Tunisia and why that actually is harmful to democracy?
Sure. Thanks for asking me the question about the coup that's not, that is, that may be, who knows?
I'm not asking you if it's a coup. I'm asking you why it's
So I think
negative to put it in that frame.
I think a lot of Western scholars and Western political scientists and policymakers and even political sociologists think in a very linear Western framework about politics and about democracy. I get in so many arguments with people about whether Tunisia is a democracy or not. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it is not yet a consolidated democracy. We are not in the clear. It takes years, and many countries that experience democratic transition don't complete the cycle, don't become democracies, as we saw in Latin America in the 90s, as we saw in some Eastern European countries. Just because you get on the path to democracy doesn't mean you stay on it. So thinking about the coup thing and whether it's a coup or not, it's complicated in Tunisia. You saw President Kais had supporters that were encouraging him and applauding him for the action that he took. If that happened in the US, we would say it's dictatorship, it's a one-man show. But if you also have popular support for it, that complicates things. Is it a democracy, or is it not? So I think by asking if it's a coup, that has implications. You know, the US cannot provide assistance to a country that experienced a coup. So calling it a coup,
I see,
means no vaccines for Tunisia, means no support for civil society, means no military assistance.
So it's kind of a way for us to be like, oh, coup, bye,
right.
We're done here.
And it's complicated. We're still seeing what's happening. It wasn't a military coup. It wasn't some outsider who came and overthrew the president. So asking if it's a coup or not, or writing headlines saying it's a coup, is problematic because it misses the nuance of politics in Tunisia and transitioning democracies.
Versus, you know, if we think about Myanmar, where it was clearly the military coming in, booting Aung San Suu Kyi without any popular support whatsoever. I mean, I feel like that was clearly a coup. But this is, you know, like I was even asking you all, I was like, wait, I'm confused. Are they protesting for the president and against parliament? Like, what's going on here? It is very, very complex and nuanced. So, yeah, I appreciate you just kind of clearing that up for everyone and hopefully clearing that up for journalists. What do you think that the international community, on either you can pitch in on this, should be doing or should do either in response to this or to continue to support the democratic transition in Tunisia?
I'll speak to this as an American citizen and a former diplomat, and Madame Monia can speak to it as a Tunisian who has valid opinions about what the international community should do. We know that the Europeans and the Americans and the Canadians are very involved in Tunisia. So I'll speak to the American audience and the Western audience at least. One, don't give up on Tunisia. Continue to invest in Tunisia. Economic programs, security programs, civil society programs. Do not give up, because what happens is, it's been 10 years. And what happens is there's always a shiny new object and you move on.
You have donor fatigue, and it's not cool in the news anymore, and whatever. Right.
So guess what? It's cool in the news again. So let's not in Tunisia, and let's continue to invest. If we really want an Arab democracy in the region to advance our interests, let's continue to invest in it, and in people who were previously marginalized or who were not part of the political process before. So I think, one, we need to continue to show them our commitment and to continue to invest in different sectors of Tunisian society. And two, let's move away from the coup versus not coup. The Biden administration did not say that it was a coup, did not acknowledge, they said, let's have reform, let's have dialogue. So let's do that. Let's continue to work with the Tunisians, with different sectors, and let them take ownership over the process. Let's not impose US ideas about political science and US ideas about democracy and governance. Let Tunisians decide what's right for Tunisians, but be there to support them.
Thank you so much, Mara. Monia, what are your thoughts on how can the U.S. support Tunisia? What should we be doing?
I think Moro said everything I wish to say and fluently. I think, yes, and democracy, transitional democracy in Tunisia need to be supported in, especially in economic way. We can't imagine installing democracy without the democratization of economic and social life of people, there is no one kind of democracy. There are principles of democracy, and I think you should, and USA and every European state countries should trust Tunisian people, and especially women, Tunisian women. We are very jealous of our what we did, about what we succeed to do, and we just need to distrust, supports in economic and social way, and try to support progressive movements in Tunisia, and I always I was always claiming till now to support civil society to disseminate human rights. And this is the solution, I think.
Thank
in
you so much.
addition to economic and social support. This is the problem, Samantha, excuse me to take the floor, but I think...
She's definitely a judge. No, I'm kidding.
Listen, the judges are not very good speakers. They are good listeners, but not good speakers. I'm trying to speak in English, and it's very difficult.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you for your encouragement. What I want to say that the problem of international organization and of the buyers, the fund buyers, who give money.
The donors.
Thank you, Maro. Is that they come in Tunisia, they said, we will work on this topic. And it's not necessarily the priority of the Tunisian activists on Tunisian problems. They have to let Tunisian people decide about their priorities and give them the funds to work.
So rather than us coming in and saying, "Hey, we've got all these programs, we want you to do them,"
yes,
coming in and kind of giving, we would call that unrestricted funds in the donor world, to basically determine your priorities and take action on them. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yes. I'm a head of an association called the Arab Center for International Aid. Our main purpose is to train students, teachers, to disseminate the culture of human rights, of IHL, etc. We, since 2018, we are not capable to find funds with donors because we are not respecting the agendas of this donor. And it's a problem. And I don't want to work on other topics that are very interesting, but it's not my priority.
Right, it's not the priority of the organization to work on,
exactly.
clean water
Many,
or whatever.
yeah, many associations are working on different subjects and topics that are not necessarily their specialities, just because to get
Because
funds.
that's what the donor says, right? That's
Yeah,
really important to know. Thank you so much, Munya. I want to move to another topic, which I think is interesting. So we've talked a lot about radicalization on this show and preventing violent extremism. And in one of your articles, Maro, you point out that about 7,000 Tunisians had joined, this was 2019, terrorist groups in Syria, Iraq, and Libya, including about 700 Tunisian women who it looks like were being recruited by people promising payments for sexual services, which were not as much delivered. Can you talk a little bit about the phenomena of why Tunisian women were being kind of preyed upon and recruited and were joining terrorist groups? And is that still a phenomena that we're seeing now?
Thank you, Samantha. It's an important question, and I want to hear Madame Munya's views on this. So I concluded that research in 2019, so I haven't followed up on what's the latest, but I want to say that it's a problem because women feel marginalized. So Tunisia had the highest number of foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq per capita.
Wow.
When serving in Tunisia as a diplomat in 2014, and then all the way until I was doing dissertation fieldwork in 2018, 2019. So I don't know if that has changed. The composition of ISIS has changed and other things have changed. So I can't speak to the issue today. But back then, and I suspect this is still true, this is the danger of not including women in the political process. This is the danger of not politically empowering women. If women are promised payments, that means their situation is likely dire, and their economic situation, they're in precarious positions where they're willing to do sexual favors in exchange for money to feed their families.
Yeah,
So
they've got to be in bad shape. And I saw in your research as well that women's unemployment was about double men's unemployment rates.
Right. So talking about how to empower Tunisians and how to empower Tunisian women specifically, let's help them out economically. Let's bring them into the political process and give them a voice and empower them and tell them that their voice matters. These women are trying to find a meaning. They're trying to contribute to something greater than them. And to be part of this mission and have this vision for, an Islamic caliphate, it might not be what you or Madame Munya or I would want to do, but it's still a sense of belonging. So you have economic reasons, you have political reasons, you have social reasons, and it's very dangerous. And right now, I would say, say what you want about Islamists in Tunisia, but if we're kicking Islamists out of power 100%, these women are frustrated. And we don't know how that could manifest in other ways. If some segment of Tunisian women doesn't feel heard, we don't know what consequences that could have.
So you're saying if the Islamist women do not feel as if their voices are heard, they could go to a society where they feel like, or take some kind of action?
Maybe.
Like what are...
Maybe. Yeah. This is hypothetical. I will not I haven't done that research, but it's something, if women don't feel heard, then they'll try to go somewhere where they do feel heard, or do things where they do feel like they're heard and their life has meaning. So in general, I would say give women political empowerment and economic empowerment, listen to women, and implement these laws, like Madame Munya was saying.
Give women political empowerment and listen to them. Munya, any comments on the radicalization of women?
Thank you, Maro, again for this analysis. I think we have to go also through other reasons. Education is a reason also, because we notice that among these 300,000 young men and women, many of them are well and high educated. But the question is, what kind of education we are giving to this young. It's not enough to keep the children to the schools and just give them information, knowledge. It's also it's mainly to learn them how to think, how to be
critical thinkers.
Yes, critical thinkers. You know, as I said, many of these young people, women or men, are very high educated, engineers, doctors, etc. And the question how they could be easily manipulated by some people who use religion to involve them in this movement. And I think we have to also think about education. It's not only the poverty, the marginalization. No, some neighbors of mine are rich people, and they lost their children because they didn't learn them how about religion, because they have nothing
Monia, they lost them to what? What did they lose their children to?
They lost because they went to Syria.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and some of them are colleagues of my daughter.
Wow. Yeah, Mauro, anything you want to pitch in here?
And
no, I agree with Madame Monia. That's a really good point. They are highly educated, and they're not always poor. They can be affluent as well.
Right, and that they have to learn it, or they have to, they have to have education. So we're coming up to the end of our show. I want to give both of you just a big thank you for coming on and for offering your insights. I think I know I have learned a lot about the women's movement in Tunisia. I'm excited. I know, Miss Monia, you're going to be involved in this statement. Is the statement going to be released tomorrow at the Women's Day?
yes, I suppose that it will be released tomorrow, and I promise I will send it to you.
So what exactly is this statement? It's a group of women's organizations that are releasing. Can you explain what what's going to be?
Women, called the Women 25th July, and it's a statement about the reasons of the protests and the reasons why women are supporting Qais Said, the president, at least in this state, because we are following what he is doing, and as I said, we remain very attentive, and we will be very critical if we note that something are not going well with democratic issues, and I will, as I said, I will send it to you. It's a good statement, and it's for us as women kind to express ourselves, to participate, to explain things, because we don't believe that it's a coup. It's not a coup. Till now, it's not a coup. Because the president used the constitution, the Article 11,
Article 80
of the constitution, and we think yes, some details were not respected, but because it wasn't possible for the president to respect these details, because the responsibility to keep away Tunisia from the crisis push him to freeze the parliament and out the
House,
government.
yeah.
So they are the causes of the crisis. How can the president, could the president consult the president of the parliament and the head of the government, while they are the reason of this crisis, and while people are claiming to push them out the political what political
Political machine. I don't know. System.
yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Monia, for your perspective on that. So it sounds like there is a lot of support for the president and his, citing of Article 80 of the Constitution. So we're going to end there. So I just want to say thank you to my guests for teaching me a lot. Hopefully, our audience learned a lot, and I wish the best for tomorrow. I'm excited to see the statement that comes out and International Women's Day, or excuse me, the Women's Day in Tunisia and what happens tomorrow. And hopefully, this will help the U.S. From an advocacy perspective to keep the funding going, keep the focus on Tunisia, even when it's not in the news. So thank you to both of you women for your amazing work and for appearing on the show with me tonight.
Thank you very much, Samantha. I would like also to thank you, Moro, because Moro knows many things about Tunisia and could express herself more than me and better than me, and I'm really thankful for you, Moro. And please let people hear your voice, because you are very good supporter for Tunisia and for women Tunisian. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Samantha.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Madame Monia. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep fighting. Tunisian women are amazing. I'm an Egyptian woman, and I look to you for inspiration and guidance. And Arab women, we're not as oppressed as people think we are. We have a voice. We're empowered. Madame Monia is a judge. I have a doctorate, and I work at a university. So thank you for having us, Samantha, and amplifying our voices.
Yeah, absolutely. Good night. Good night, ladies. Well, that was a great show. About the Tunisian protests, about the role of women, and I love what the point that Mara just made, that Arab women are not as oppressed as you think that they are, and that is really interesting hearing that Monia is worried that the judiciary is going to become too female, that there's actually going to be too many women and not enough men in the judiciary. I don't even know what the percentage of female judges in the U.S. is, but I'm pretty sure it's very low. It doesn't sound like it's nearly as high as in Tunisia. But I think just to echo their voices of that we need to, not get donor fatigue and keep our support going for this region. And Mara didn't say it, but in our pre-call, we talked about how all of these women's rights organizations have depended on a lot on funding from the U.S. and from other countries to be able to exist and to be able to grow and get work done. And they're doing really good work, and that democracy doesn't happen overnight. And going back to Afghanistan, doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't happen because of the military. It happens because of civil society. Civil society, people from the country, that's what fuels a democratic transition. It's not because of our troops on the ground, although that can, we can help protect those activists. So on behalf of myself, I just want to thank our sponsors, Stream Inspectors, the amazing team that produces this show, that gets all the cool slideshows up, that makes sure that the tech goes without glitches. Zach and his team, huge thank you to Stream Inspectors. If you do need live production, look to Stream Inspectors for your live production needs. I also want to point out my company, Empower Global, also sponsors this show. We do training on women's leadership and diversity and inclusion. For global companies, sometimes utilizing virtual reality to put people in someone else's shoes. So if you're a company that's looking to create a more tolerant community of people that can communicate with each other in a way that is courageous and in a way that embodies listening. We do a lot of really, really cool trainings that have great effects for a range of different companies across the world. And lastly, we are starting our next Women's Leadership Challenge. It's an amazing program that will train you to be like Maro and like Monia, teach you how to speak truth to power, to create social change, to change the system, and to recognize and step into your own power. And that's the Women's Leadership Challenge. Our next cohort, our next virtual cohort starts in September. Online, and then our very first in-person cohort will take place in Washington, D.C. starting in October. It is a 10-week course. It is awesome. The ladies absolutely love it, and it creates connections like these across borders where the feminist movements can become linked and we can work together to achieve gender equity. So that link will also be in the chat. And lastly, if you liked the show, if you think it's important to highlight the role of women in conflict, in protest, in anything, please support us on Patreon. We really appreciate your support. The lowest subscription is $3 a month. That's literally less than a Starbucks latte. I'm pretty sure my last one cost over $5, especially if you add soy milk to it. So for less than a Starbucks latte, you can support reporting and lifting up women's voices like Monia's, like Maro's. So our Patreon link is also in the comments. So I encourage you to become a subscriber on Patreon. You'll also get exclusive members only exclusives and ability to ask people questions before the show and things like that. Next week, Wednesday at 7 p.m. will be our next show. Topic to be TBA, to be announced. And that's it for this week's episode of Samantha Politics. Thanks, everyone, and good night.